We start in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. All praise is due to the one God, the Lord of the universe. And may peace and blessings, and may the peace and blessings of God be upon His final prophet, Muhammad, his family, and companions. Students, faculty, friends, and colleagues, I greet you all with the Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today is an event in a series of events sponsored by the Muslim Student Union at UCI. The Muslim Student Union is a religious student organization that seeks to serve the Muslim student community by providing religious services and fostering social, spiritual, educational, and moral development in a way that compels Muslim students to contribute positively and uniquely to the campus community and beyond. This week, titled Palestine, an Invisible Nation, aims to educate and raise awareness on campus about the plight of the Palestinian people who have been living under illegal occupation for almost 63 years, with the hope that this knowledge will turn into action. Our annual week has unfortunately often been misconstrued to be one that harbors anti-Semitism. The MSU has clarified numerous times and will continue to clarify that hatred of any particular group on the basis of their race, color, ethnicity, or religion, including people of the Jewish faith, is not and will not be tolerated. This is not a politically correct statement to be recited for public purposes, but it is among the deepest convictions of our own faith. It is disingenuous, however, to label anyone who has the courage to stand up and speak out against the apartheid policies of Israel as anti-Semitic. The week's aim, in short, is to simply call for an end to the oppression of the indigenous Palestinians. Co-sponsors for this week include Al-Kalima, Students for Justice in Palestine, the Black Student Union, American Indian Student Association, the Radical Student Union, Mecha de UCI, Asian Pacific Student Association, Worker Student Alliance, Kababayan, and the Turkish Student Association. So before we start the event today, we will begin with some verses from the Muslim holy book, the Quran. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وهل أتاك حديث موسى إذ نادى ربه بالواد المقدس طوى اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى فقل هل لك إلى أن تزكى وأهديك إلى ربك فتخشى فأراه الآية الكبرى فكذب وعصى ثم أدبر يسعى فحشر فنادى فقال أنا ربكم الأعلى فأخذه الله نكال الآخرة والأولى إن في ذلك لعبرة لمن يخشى. I'll read the English meaning of the verses that are recited. It says, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Have you heard the story of Moses? When his Lord called him in the sacred valley of Tuwa and said, go to the Pharaoh, for he has indeed transgressed all bounds, and tell him, have you the desire to purify your soul? If so, I shall guide you towards your Lord so that you may fear him. Then Moses showed Pharaoh the mighty sign, but he denied and disobeyed. Then Pharaoh quickly turned back, assembled his people, and made a proclamation that he is your Lord, the Most High. Consequently, God seized him for punishment, both in the hereafter and in this life. Surely, in this, there is a lesson for those who are conscious of God. Before I give the bio for the speaker, I would just like to remind everybody, those who are videotaping, that it's perfectly fine that you videotape, but the cops have asked to maintain an 18-inch personal space, so please listen to the cops' directives. Thank you. And now, to introduce the speaker. Matan Cohen is an Israeli political activist, primarily concerned with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He is a co-founder of a direct action group called Anarchists Against the Wall. Also, he is a military service refuser and is currently the National BDS Director with Students for Justice in Palestine. His opinion articles and interviews have appeared among other places in The Nation, The Guardian, CNN, BBC, NBC, ABC, Al Jazeera, The New York Times, The Boston Globe, The Washington Post, Al Ahram, Haaretz, the book Occupied Minds, and the film Enraged, as well as the other film Intifada Cult. Without further ado, Matan Cohen.
Can everyone hear me? Are we good on the speakers? Good. First of all, let me just say it's a great honor to be at the University of California, Irvine, and I cherish the opportunity to be addressing you today. Although I'm more of a coffee person, I'm awfully happy that a tea party is here to participate as well. And I just want to make clear that I'm more than happy to answer any questions addressed to me, be it from my opposition or from my supporters, and that as long as we maintain an intellectually courageous dialogue or conversation about the truth, which is at times difficult, we're all welcome in this space, so thank you. As I was all too kindly introduced, I'm an Israeli political activist, currently in the United States. I'm heading back to Israel in 2 weeks from now. And I wanted to share with you some of my experiences. I grew up in Israel. On my mother's side, my family fled to Israel after the Holocaust, where most of my family was murdered. On my other side, my dad's side, I'm an Iraqi Jew. My family fled Iraq in 1951 to settle in Israel. I grew up in a reality that resonates greatly with the title for this week's event, Palestine, an Invisible Nation. So I want to start by asking us, all of us, to deliberate on what does it mean to be invisible in a political, social, and economic sense. I grew up in a reality where we did not see Palestinians. If we did see them, we saw them as those who cleaned our houses, did our laundry, or cleaned our yards. My first engagement with Palestine was when I was 15 years old, or 14 rather, when, having read the newspapers at the beginning of the Second Intifada in 2000, I discovered that while Israelis had faces, names, and families, stories to tell, Palestinians were merely a list of names. No families, no stories, no background. At the age of 14, I went to the besieged city of Nablus, which was at that time under siege for the majority of that year. It was late 2002, early 2003. I remember going through an Israeli checkpoint and waving hello to the Israeli soldiers whom I saw as my brothers and sisters. It was only upon turning back and gazing at the line of hundreds of people waiting to cross that very checkpoint I just crossed without any problem that I came to understand, first on a very intuitive level, what it meant for an entire population to become invisible to us. What it means for an entire population to become superfluous. What it means for life to be deemed not sacred enough to defend. What it means when people's lives become expendable in the calculation in which security, or under the guise of security, every other policy of segregation, colonization, and dispossession is permitted. After this visit, I began being active in the occupied territories, in particular in the West Bank. We founded a group called Anarchists Against the Wall in the year 2003, and we were basically the first group in Israel to respond to the crisis of the construction of the wall. The wall at that time, we have to recall, was considered by most Israelis and the most of the international community to be merely a temporary measurement aimed at securing Israel's well-being. What we saw on the ground, however, was radically different. We went to villages who 98% of their land, like in the village of Masha and the Kilkilia region, were annexed for the construction of the wall, or rather for the expansion of the El-Kana settlement on the other side. This reality created a huge dissonance and a discomfort for someone like me coming from the mainstream of Israel, as what we proclaimed was security had a very dire effect on people's lives. And not merely did it have a dire effect on their lives, what I saw in the eyes of Palestinians upon encountering them was the rage and anger and frustration at these policies that I understood later could not culminate in anything but violence that we would later understand as senseless violence. But you can only understand these forms of violence, be it if you condemn them or not, after you have engaged, encountered, and saw what are the root causes for such anger. When I was 17 years old, I was shot by an Israeli border policeman. I was shot by 4 bullets, rubber bullets, as they're called. 1 hit my eye, 3 others hit my back and legs. When this happened, it was the front page of all the Israeli media. But why do I tell you this? I tell you this because Palestinians have been dying under very similar circumstances day after day. I've lost 21 of my friends in the struggle against the wall. Their names were not mentioned, not known to any of us. My name was mentioned. My blood was a bit more expensive than those of Palestinians. To become invisible in this context means that your blood is cheap. And the politics that we put forth, where justice is at the core of this politics, means a re-engagement with a population that by all other means was deemed invisible and expendable. So what do we do on the ground? Let's take the wall as an example because oftentimes we talk about apartheid. So let's just clarify what it means to take the wall as an example. Apartheid was postulated in South Africa, a regime that started in 1948 as an official, formal system of political, economic, and social segregation based on ethnicities and race. It meant that different people had different statuses, different rights, different responsibilities, and different obligations to a regime that reigned over all of them. What we see today in Palestine is a regime where from the river to the sea in what we call historical Palestine or Israel, mandatory territories under British rule before 1948, is that you have one sovereign, Israel. You have 2 ethnic populations. If I and a Palestinian committed the same crime, the same place, and the same time, I probably will not see a day in prison. A Palestinian will probably sit 1 to 3 years. I'll tell you a little anecdote that will sort of highlight what it means to have a segregative system of apartheid. I got a call from people in the village in which I was shot, Beit Zira, next to Ramallah, several months after I was injured. They told me that a 12-year-old boy was indicted in a military court in Ofer by Ramallah. And they asked me to come and help them to see what the indictment meant and get them a lawyer. The indictment, an official indictment of the State of Israel, read as follows. Between the years 2003 and 2006, the defendant threw between 1 and 7 stones or other objects at either military facility, military vehicle, or military personnel. That was the end of the indictment. Not a date, not a mention of any evidence. Can anyone guess what this kid got? He was sentenced to 1.5 years in prison. This means apartheid. It means that had I done the same thing, I would have had legal defense, and I would have had the defense of the legal system. So in a funny way, my life as an Israeli, even though I'm very oppositional of my own government's position, in this ethnocratic regime that separates us according to blood, is still more valuable than that of Palestinians, although this is eroding as well. The villages on which I was talking in the occupied territories lost all of their livelihood. The village of Masha that I mentioned before, where Anarchists Against the Wall was founded, as I said, lost 98% of its land. People who used to work in Israel before were now cut off. On the land that was taken for security reasons was a new settlement, El-Kana B, El-Kana Bet. We went to open the gate at the fence after its completion in late 2003 in December. Palestinians were supposed to have access to their agricultural land on the other side of the wall. But they never did. The army never came to open the gates, so we decided to open it ourselves. The response of the Israeli army was very brutal. They opened fire, live ammunition, at us, and shot one of my friends in the legs. He almost bled to death as we were waiting for an ambulance while the Israeli army was preventing it from crossing the checkpoint. Ever since, Anarchists Against the Wall has participated in over 1,500 protests in the occupied territories and within Israel itself. So what do we do and what is our aim? Let me be very blunt about it. In a political system where entire populations become invisible, where their lives are expendable, what we come to ask is to reevaluate what human life means, what justice means. And it is precisely this valuation of life, the sense of justice, I think all of us have forgotten. And we've forgotten this because we no longer see Palestinians at all. We don't have any engagement of whatever sort with them. Which is aimed not so much at Israel's security, but at precisely at maintaining this distance, where populations cannot identify with one another, when people cannot identify with one another, where they cannot see each other's eyes. In 2006, I'll tell you another anecdote. I was working at Israeli human rights group Physicians for Human Rights. It was soon after I was shot. The Israeli army, after the famous disengagement from Gaza, created what they call a buffer zone. A buffer zone is an area into which people are not Palestinians, are not allowed to enter. It runs roughly a mile into the Gaza Strip in the northern part. Israel used to sporadically shoot at this area in order to, quote, deter potential shooting at Israel. They said it was safe. On one of those safe occasions, one of their 155mm shells hit the Ghalia family on the Gaza beach. It killed 9 members of the same family. They were brought for medical treatment as a humanitarian favor in Tel Aviv. I ran to the hospital as soon as I heard the news, and I spent 3 months with them there, translating from Hebrew to Arabic the doctor's instructions and actually trying to talk to those people. And it's emblematic as a story of what disengagement means. The family of the injured was not allowed to leave the hospital, nor were they granted food or water. They stayed there 24/7 for months on end as Israel took care of them. People who we used to see before as humans were now targets or what we call collateral damage. To me, a 9-year-old girl who was hit, who both legs were amputated, was not a collateral damage. She was a precious human life that we need to protect and we need to defend. But unfortunately, people marching around us in circles, I don't think they see that, really. And while people find it hard to talk about apartheid, apartheid is a reality in which we live. Roads are segregated. Different populations, ethnically defined, drive on different roads. Palestinians are banned from entering almost 90% of the occupied territories, which is already 22% of their mandatory land. Their land is grazed, their olive groves are uprooted, their home demolished at an unprecedented rate. And at all this time we're asked, guys, why don't you want to have a dialogue? So let me ask you back, when you have such an asymmetry of power, when you have one country occupying another and making it invisible, what is it we're actually talking about? Are we talking about recognition? Are we talking about a joint life, or are we merely drawing more time so that we can expand settlements? Under the guise of the peace process since Oslo, Israel has continued to expand its settlement population. In fact, it was precisely in the years of the Oslo peace talks the settlements grew at the most rapid pace ever. These days, Israel argues once again that it has no partner to talk to. But the fact of the matter is that in 2002, the Arab League has adopted a resolution calling for an end to the conflict, a recognition of Israel, based on the two-state solution. Israel had no response to that. More recently, Palestinians have ended the divide that began after the democratic elections in which Hamas won. Tomorrow, well, actually on the 15th, there's a call from Palestinian civil society for young people like you and I to go and march towards Israeli settlements, roadblock, to march on roads that are for Israelis only, for Jews only, break the siege on Gaza together with the flotilla, which we expect now to arrive in a month, and bring an end to the system of apartheid and segregation. The response from Israel is to say that this poses a security threat, and yesterday they've ordered the deployment of 10 new paratrooper brigades in the occupied territories in order to crush resistance. But let me just tell you this. As an Israeli, as a Jew, I stand by my brothers and sisters in Palestine and their resistance. I'm going home in 2 weeks, and I plan to be with them, side by side, marching against Israeli apartheid. And we should get out of this mentality where we see any pronouncement of democratic principles as a threat to a people's existence. Israel's response, for example, to the Arab world revolts was to say it's a destabilizing factor. What was destabilizing in what happened? What does it say when a government says that a democratic effort of a people destabilizes an order? What does it mean about that order? One of the demands of the boycott, divestments, and sanctions movements against Israel was to have full equality for all citizens, for all people living under that sovereign, under Israel. Israel said that there was a threat to its security. So I want to ask all of you, what does it mean when asking for democracy, when asking for full equality and civil rights, comes to mean a threat to democracy? What sort of a democracy is it we're talking about here? The answer, I'm afraid, is very simple. It means a democracy for Jews. Israel proclaims itself to be a Jewish and democratic state, but as a member of Israeli Knesset himself said recently, Israel is more of a democratic state for its Jewish citizens and a Jewish state for its Palestinian citizens. And as funny as it may sound, this is what apartheid looks like, this is how it functions, and this is what it does every day. So what are we to do about this? We need to be very clear and adamant about our resistance to these policies. We need to show how this politics of resistance to occupation, segregation, and racism is one. That the struggle for recognition of Native Americans in this country, for the liberation of African Americans and other ethnic minorities in this country, that the struggle against the war in Iraq and Afghanistan is one with the struggle for Palestinian rights. They're not different, they're part of the same struggle. And it is our task, all of us, to stand together and fight for these rights. It's up to all of us to ask hard questions, and that's what I want us to do right now. We don't have a lot of time, so I want to open the floor right now for Q&A. I know we have a lot of opposition and a lot of questions, so I want to push them. Please ask hard questions. I want to ask all of you who are supportive to ask hard questions as well. This is what a true conversation means. It doesn't mean to have a seemingly balanced dialogue, because there's no balance here. There's a very deep and entrenched asymmetry of power, where one side is a violent perpetrator of apartheid and the other is a victim of colonization. So without further ado, your questions. Thank you.